Hey everyone, I'm Skylar,
And I'm Gary.
and this is the Nerds Inc. podcast. Today we are talking season one of HBO's The Last of Us with a very special guest. We have our friend Chris with us today. Chris, glad to have you. Why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself?
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for introducing me, Skylar. Thank you, Gary, for having me. Um, Longtime friend of Gary and Skylar, uh, residential nerd, big anime fan, big video game fan. So I'm just here to contribute any way I can.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you, man. I know we've known each other for a few years now, and it's really awesome to be able to have you on. I know you also help run a Facebook page called the Circle of Nerds, so really
Yes.
cool to be able to have you on, man, and to be talking The Last of Us, which is a show I think that we were all kind of blown away by. So ready to get into
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate that plug as well for the group.
it. All right, Gary. So you want to start us off for those that maybe haven't finished it yet. This is, of course, going to be another, uh, review that we talk a little bit about spoilers, but we're of course going to start off with our spoiler-free kind of synopsis and review. So, do you want to tell the people about The Last of Us?
Yep, definitely want to bring this up. So, The Last of Us is a TV series that was on HBO Max, as Scholar said, and it is about. It really follows a few people, but it's after a global pandemic destroys civilization. A hardened survivor takes charge of a 14-year-old girl who may be humanity's last hope. I love that log line, I guess, for the series because it fits perfectly. So, Skylar, or actually Chris, what was your let's since we're doing spoiler free, what was your initial thoughts of the series?
My initial thought, I was actually a little afraid because it was a video game adaptation and they have a bad connotation, but it blew me away. It changed all any like preconceived notions I had about video game adaptations. So that's my initial thoughts. Was I was very nervous.
Yeah, me and Skylar actually talked about that on a previous episode. How video games have a bad reputation for being pretty bad for adaptations. So it was definitely one of those things where you kind of go into it nervously or anxiously cautious, I would say.
It's a good way
Skylar,
to
what
put
were
it.
your thoughts initially?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like Chris, like you, Gary, I think we're all similarly on the same page here. I think to take a video game adaptation, which if I'm not mistaken, Chris, correct me, it came out originally for the PS4, the first
Uh,
game of the
Pretty sure
series.
it did. I'm
Or
I'm not positive
yeah,
because I actually only played the first one like once. So
okay, okay.
yeah.
So I think it was either PS4, if not
Hmm.
PS3. And then I know the most recent, The Last of Us Part 2, did come out for the PS4,
Right.
like literally right before the PS5 dropped.
Hmm.
So I know they did a remaster for it. But, we have two video games that they're kind of adapting now for HBO. And, for those that watch HBO Max, like the quality of content that they have is always just absolutely
Oh yeah.
remarkable. Everything that they adapt is just it's special, whether it's a book, whether it's an anime, whether obviously it's a video game here. So I knew it was going to be good. Obviously, hearing about the casting of Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey and
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
roles of Joel and Ellie, I knew it was going to be special.
Hmm.
So I was excited to see this, and it actually exceeded my expectations, which I
Hmm.
think is really special for any show to do, even if it is HBO, because like Gary
Right.
said, like how many times have we been let down by video game
Right.
adaptations these days?
Exactly.
But I also feel like this is such a great turning point in cinema, in streaming,
Hmm.
because now we're actually starting to see them kind of take this long form approach where they stretch it out over a season. Maybe it's a mini series. And I think that's what makes this show work so well is they take their time with it.
They did.
I mean, you take a video game and you make it into 9 episodes, about an hour long each. You can delve into backstories that the game barely, scratches
Scratches.
the
Yep.
surface on.
Exactly.
And I think that's what makes this show so special is that they take their time with it, And I was honestly, I had really high expectations for this show and it shattered it. So that's kind of my initial takeaway.
Yeah, that says a lot. To your point, Scholar, The Last of Us, the first game came out in 2013, originally for the PlayStation 3.
Mm,
And then it came out in 2014 for the PlayStation 4. So,
gotcha.
again, that's a lot of history to go back on. 2013, 10 years ago. But I didn't have much of an expectation for it. And I guess that's probably why I loved it so much, because I didn't play the first game until like a couple of months before the series dropped, because it became free on PlayStation Plus.
Okay.
And I didn't even beat the game. I only played like through most of the intro, and I enjoyed it. I just got busy, couldn't finish it. But I feel like in regards to tone and how they handle the character of Joel, they were spot on with that. And like you, Scholar, I agree. Like the casting of Pedro Pascal was probably the most perfect aspect of it, because he perfectly embodied the demeanor, the charisma, and all of that of Joel, to the point where I felt like I was literally seeing the character of Joel on screen from the video game. So it's funny. We all were kind of in different arenas. I had very little to no expectations because I didn't play the games. Skylar had very high expectations, and Chris was kind of like, eh.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show how good this series was to not only exceed Skylar's expectations, but to make someone who wasn't a fan, who never really played the games, a huge fan of the series and the games.
Mm-hmm. And I honestly, what I really want to touch on too, before we start getting into our spoilers, is I want to give all the flowers possible to Craig Mazin and to Neil Druckmann. Neil Druckmann is the original creator, the original writer of the games. He also was a writer on Uncharted 4, A Thief's End. And then he also was an uncredited writer for Uncharted 2. So he comes from the Naughty Dog production company, as far as for video games. And I love that they brought him on as a writer and as kind of a consultant for this show. And Craig Mazin has a very interesting history that I wanted to touch on real quick. A lot of people don't know this. This guy got started working with Todd Phillips on the Hangover movies.
Huh. Wow.
Well, I mean, not technically his start. He actually also helped co-wrote Scary Movie 4, if anybody remembers Scary Movie 4.
I do.
That's crazy.
Which was like, that was kind of when the Scary movies started kind of going downhill, because obviously it was well after the Wayans brothers had sold their rights for the film after the second one. So he got to work on Scary Movie 4, then he gets to work on The Hangover Part 3, and he's kind of working with Todd Phillips on writing that. So you can kind of see his progression as a writer, where he's working on these projects that really aren't that great. And then he goes from something like that to years later. More recently, I think what really gave him the cred with HBO is he worked on the miniseries Chernobyl, which if you haven't seen Chernobyl,
huge.
those that are listening, it's a great miniseries, also on HBO Max, soon to be Max. We'll talk about that later. But, turn it into the streaming company Max. But yeah, I mean, he got his footing with Chernobyl and HBO, and that took off, and it was amazing, and it kind of got all these Emmy nods. And then to see him go from that to this, and now he's the showrunner for The Last of Us and also the head writer, to work in tandem with Neil Druckmann is like, it's something really special. And I think you talk about a glow up. Craig Mazin had his glow up with The Last of Us and Chernobyl. So it is, I had to mention those two because, a lot of the times we don't always know the writers or the showrunners.
Right.
And I think it's really important to mention them because it's no easy feat to adapt something like this and to make it as good as it is, as heartfelt as it is. And I think that we found two really, really great writers.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely agree. So are we ready to get into spoilers?
We're going to get into spoilers, so if you haven't seen or finished all of The Last of Us, please pause the episode right here. If you're watching on YouTube, you're listening on the podcast, and go watch it. It is worth it. I promise you.
Definitely.
All right.
So, Skylar, go ahead. Kick us off.
Oh, So I kind of wanted to briefly go episode by episode,
Cool.
not necessarily talk about kind of the synopsis of that because that's not what we're here to do, but at least kind of talk about our thoughts for each episode, right?
Mhm.
So kind of going in to episode 1, it's titled "When You're Lost in the Darkness." We know that the outbreak is just now happening. We're kind of seeing it on unfold. Chris, what were your thoughts with episode 1?
Episode 1 is actually when I gained my confidence in how the show was gonna go because Pedro Pascal, he's phenomenal. Um, so we're doing spoilers now, right? So I can. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we're
So okay.
doing spoilers.
So with his daughter, when his daughter died or was killed by the seemingly like good forces that we thought were like there to save them, but they weren't because they were trying to escape from the outbreak. Just the emotion that he put into like holding her and grasping her, it was like ridiculous. And I was like, he's gonna crush this show just like he did Mandalorian. So yeah.
Yeah, and honorable mention there to the actress Nico Parker, who plays Sarah Miller, Joel's daughter in the first episode. Like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gary, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree with Chris in that. I think seeing the actress Nico Parker's portrayal of Sarah in those brief scenes really just made it like, okay, they were serious about this series. Like they weren't trying to just do something just to do it. They were like, okay, we're going to put our all into this. Like, hey, like focus on what you're actually trying to do. And it's almost as if I'm correct, the actual guy who wrote the games, was part of the series. So, like, they took heavy notes from him and was very involved.
Mm-hmm.
So that just really just sold me. And her acting alone was like, okay, like this is something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought what made episode 1 so special as well is that even if you play like the first maybe 20, 30 minutes of the first game, it is almost like frame by frame what they do, especially when they're all kind of piling in the truck and they're trying to escape Austin, Texas. Yeah. Like you can see they did like a frame by frame comparison in the game, and they were showing everything kind of POV, and it was like almost identical. And you kind of know that heart and that gut wrenching moment is coming with Sarah at the end of the episode, and it is. I was tearing up, honestly. Like it has every bit of the gut punch as the game, and if not more. And you're kind of left episode 1 just like in a puddle of tears and like wondering, like, man, do I want to keep watching this? Is this just going to depress me the whole time? But you keep going because you want to see what happens.
Right.
And the crazy thing about that whole thing was I had started it late, and so like first 3 episodes had already been out when I finally watched the first episode. And so I finished that first episode and my jaw was to the ground like, what is going on? Because by this point I had only played just the beginning, so I hadn't gotten to that part of the game. So I was just floored. So that was just absolutely beautiful. And then when I finally got to that point, I was like, wow, this is even worse.
And then kind of going into the second episode, we have kind of them kind of beginning to explore kind of like the world after. And this is, of course, 20 years after the infection, and kind of what the world of the QZ is, right? Which are these kind of militarized zones that, the last remnants of humanity are living in. So what did you guys think about that? Chris, we'll start with you, man.
I liked it. I love the cinematography of the episodes. Seeing post-apocalyptic like Boston was pretty cool. I do feel like Last of Us does a better job of capturing like a post-apocalyptic world better than Walking Dead or Black Summer or the other zombie shows that are out there.
Gary.
Yeah, I agree with that. Episode 2 was kind of where I kind of fell off a little bit because it was a little bit slower, but it wasn't too bad. It was more so just like really trying to set up the rest of the world and the series. I really started to love I can't remember her name, the woman that was with them at the beginning. Tess, yes. I really started to love Tess. I think she was really well done. She started to steal the show a little bit for me, just in her demeanor and everything. But yeah, episode 2 was a little bit slower for me, but it wasn't bad. It was just the pacing, and it was needed because it had to set up the rest of the world. So
Yeah.
um, maybe a little bit lower on the totem pole, but it wasn't overall wasn't bad.
Quick thing. Episode 2 was the mushroom zombie kids, right? Like Tess and
Yeah, at the end of the
okay.
episode.
All right.
Exactly.
That
Making
was
sure.
disgusting.
It was. He went out like a G though.
And I know
He went out on her own terms.
She did,
Yeah.
and I know that was the part that was a little bit of a departure from the games. And I love the cool thing about what HBO will do at the end of the episode for most of their shows is they kind of show like an in-depth, kind of behind-the-scenes look where they interview the cast and they interview the writers and the director of the
Mhm.
episode. And I know they talked about that it was a departure from the game because in the game, you know that there's kind of like that shootout at the Capitol or the city hall. And Tess dies from human militarized forces, and then of course I think to ramp up the drama effect, they had it be the infected kind of storming the building, and Tess gets the kiss of death and then blows them all up. So it was a departure from the game, but I thought it was an interesting change.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like you guys, I really loved how immersive the world felt. I'm not sure what type of CGI or like FX that they used, but it was really like special because like you could tell that like obviously not all of it was practical. I think one thing that The Walking Dead did do well, at least in the first 2 or 3 seasons, was that they used kind of all practical backdrops. Like they shut down at Atlanta, and they I'm sure people that live in Atlanta weren't happy about that. They had the streets all blocked off and everything.
10 times more traffic.
Right. So I think that part was really cool. And I know that for this, you can kind of tell that there was some CGI, but you couldn't really tell kind of where the practical and where the CGI met, which I thought that was really,
that was really good.
interesting. So, it just shows how far that VX has come because you can make something like this where, 20 years ago, you couldn't make a show like this. It had to have been a movie because they didn't have the budget.
Right.
So I think that's what made Boston, like you said, Chris, feel like so kind of immersive, and the cinematography was great. Moving on to episode 3 called The Long, Long Time.
Crowd pleasing.
Bill and Frank. Bill and Frank. Oh, there's a lot to tackle with this episode.
Yep.
Chris, what are your thoughts?
This one was really heavy. Even if the episode had nothing to do with Last of Us or the video game franchise, just as a standalone story, that relationship was very beautiful, very tragic. You guys seen Up, right? Like the animated movie? Okay, so the end of their like relationship, like from the beginning to the end, reminded me of the opening montage of Up.
Yeah.
Because you would see them go through the entire cycle of their relationship, and then like in this show, I don't know, it was really heavy. It actually made me tear up a little bit.
Yeah.
Gary.
I couldn't finish the series week by week after that episode. I literally had to just take a break away from it and wait for it to finish because that was just so heavy. Seeing a relationship develop like that is so rare in TV because you don't see something where it's like two people just randomly meet and it becomes a gradual love. Usually it's, they randomly meet and boom, they're having sex already. But for this, they delved into that relationship in a way that was just so intricate. And I enjoyed it. And it was hard for me to turn away from it because it's just like, I want to see what's going to happen with them. And then to see at the end of the episode that they both were dead already. It's, oh man, that broke me. I'm not even gonna lie, that broke me.
Yeah, Nick Offerman, hands up to him, like he killed it, he crushed it. Because if you had said on paper that he was going to be in that role, I wouldn't have believed you. But there he was, and killed it. So
he was phenomenal.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, you have Nick Offerman as Bill, Murray Bartlett played Frank, and honestly, both of them, they kind of stole the season away from Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, at least with that third episode. There was like, no, this is their show now.
Right.
And I agree with both of you, like to take what is essentially 20 years of a relationship and compacted into one standalone episode was like really special. Like
Mhm.
that's not something I expected at all, because as we know, like in the game, this is something that's briefly mentioned. Bill's relationship with Frank is briefly mentioned. In fact, you only really know about it because you find a letter in a drawer in the house where
Right.
Frank ultimately hangs himself. So in the game, Joel and Ellie find Frank's body. He's hung himself, and Bill's character is kind of traveling with them, and you kind of see that there was some animosity there. And even in the letter, Frank's like, and hope you can die too, Bill, or like they just seem like their relationship had a falling out. So I love how they kind of changed that. They made it more about their love, kind of what they went through, finding each other. I know that I do want to briefly mention, because there were a lot of really homophobic comments that
Oh
came out
man.
after the episode. That's really upsetting to me. I mean, we're in the year 2023. If you're not okay with gay people, with the LGBTQ community, with relationships like this being displayed on a
Right.
great show like this, like, get over yourself.
Right.
Seriously.
Just get a life at this point.
If you're listening to this podcast and you have a problem with it, stop listening.
Right.
Go somewhere else.
No, I
Bury your head
agree.
in the sand. I think that was just kind of disgusting when I saw kind of the backlash for that. But good news is that was just kind of like a blip, right? It didn't really hinder the episode. The episode was still successful, and it really got a lot of people talking.
It did.
Right.
For good and bad reasons.
Exactly. And I think that was the episode also where it wasn't just about the relationship, but people were like, what, this didn't happen in the game at all. Because in the game, once again, like, you don't explore the relationship. But the great thing about a show, with it being long form, is they could take an entire episode and make you care about these characters. In the game, you don't care about Bill and Frank like this. Bill is just a guy to help you get a truck so that you can escape. Right? That's all Bill is. Bill is a means to an end. And in this episode, you really care about these characters. You kind of see Joel craft his early relationship when he brings Tess kind of early on. And then, like those final moments when they realize, look, we've had all the time that we need together. I'm ready to go with you. Like, that's some Romeo and Juliet shit.
It is.
But it is amazing.
And I think the part with Joel and Tess going to meet them early on was the part that really made that whole relationship kind of hit, because it was just like, you see how different Frank is from Bill, and you see that juxtaposed against Joel and Tess, and it's just like, okay, like, this is a unique combination. And then to see how it progresses from there, and how it becomes this just like undying love between two people who just absolutely want to see each other succeed and live on and do anything for each other. And then the way that it ends is, again, it's just hard to understand how anyone can have an issue with that.
Yeah. No, and I mean, kudos to Bill for being able to have an entire town for himself for 20 years.
Right.
Like, I mean, I know they had to fight off some raiders a few times, but like, he was holding his own. I mean, this dude had an entire town and he just had like a rifle. Like, in The Walking Dead, you couldn't hold a town like that. Someone's taking it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that was
kudos to them they literally had their own little moment of paradise for 20 years. So moving on to episode 4, which was called Please Hold My Hand. So this is where Joel and Ellie have the truck, and then of course they end up crashing and kind of dealing with raiders in Kansas City. Chris, what were your thoughts?
It was a really good episode. Now for me, this one was sort of a slow burner. Like you said it for episode 2 for you, Gary. That was me on episode 4. Now at the end of episode 4, when we meet Henry and Sam, the brothers, I realized then there was going to be a trend of this show introducing 2 characters we love besides just Joel and Ellie. And I was like, all right, they're probably going to be the next 2. Like, because I think they were holding them like, at gunpoint or something at the very end. But I knew that it was going to carry over to the next episode. It was going to be something tragic. So I was like, here we go. More emotions.
Gary.
This one was kind of forgettable for me. It wasn't a bad episode, but it was a bit of a slow burn. I think This one was more so though for the development of the relationship between Joel and Ellie,
Hmm.
because after we got to see that relationship build between Bill and Frank, I believe the showrunner was like, okay, this is where we need to fully develop Joel and Ellie's relationship a little bit more, so that you can see, okay, towards the end they're going to be almost like a father daughter
Hmm.
relationship, and I think it worked. But it was I can vaguely remember what happened this episode, honestly, other than what you just said, Chris, about the ending with Henry and
But
Sam.
I want to say one thing. I do love Ellie because she was trying to crack that cold, dark exterior of Joel, like with like the puns
She was.
and like just the different stuff. And he would, he warms up to her, but it was because of her. He was making the initiative.
Yeah,
He was treating her like
that's true.
she was extra baggage or something. Like she's tagging along, but she's seen him as a human being from the jump, a father figure from the jump, and she was like, I got to get this guy to warm up to me. So I like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really liked the beginning of this episode, just kind of like those moments between Joel and Ellie, and then of course when they crash and there's all this, gunfire happening, and Joel's gonna, he's got to take care of business. I think that's a really nice moment because you see like the lengths that Joel will go, and then you also see Ellie's reaction. Like Ellie sees him just brutally killing
Hmm.
people, and I think like that's kind of where the recognition comes in, where she comes in and then she has the gun and she shoots the guy from killing Joel. And I think that's where they both have an understanding at that moment. This is the first episode where Joel sees in her what he had to become.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really special. Like he sees like, oh man, she can be a killer too. She's got this gun. And I think he wants to protect her from that. I mean, I think he even has a line where he's like, like kids shouldn't have to see that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And because he will like straight up kill everybody, but he doesn't want her to kind of go down that same path as him. I still think that he values that innocence. So I thought like that kind of intro was a really special moment. Now, what I found really interesting that they introduced as a character who's not in the game is the character of Kathleen Coughlin, which is played by Melanie Linsky,
Hmm.
and she's kind of like that rebel leader in Kansas City that has taken over, and they've overthrown the QZ government of Kansas City, and they're kind of out there
Yeah.
patrolling. And
Yeah.
those raiders that they killed in the beginning were her people. So then
Mhm.
they of course go on the hunt for Joel and Ellie. And I thought her character was like really cold and crass, and I mean the actress did a great job.
She was
I
phenomenal.
don't think there's not a bad actor in this show. But I just thought it was kind of weird. Like it was such a departure from the game that I don't really know how I feel about it. But what about you, Chris?
Well, I didn't realize that Kathleen wasn't in the game, which is pretty cool. Because, like I said, I did played like probably like a grand total of like 4 hours of the game. So I don't even remember
Okay.
Kathleen if there was one or if there wasn't. So that's a cool fact. Especially like
Yeah,
not foreshadowing, but what ends up happening to her like next episode.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was kind of one of those moments where I feel like kind of episode by episode they kind of took their liberties from the game, which is great. I mean, it's a different adaptation, so
Right.
they should do that. And obviously, they have Neil Druckmann, the original creator, kind of encouraging them to take these steps. So
Right.
I thought it was interesting. I know they were trying to kind of bring more factions and enemies that weren't just the clickers, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I thought she was absolutely ruthless
Mhm.
though. So, but I think
Yeah.
her once they started focusing on more of like the people of Kansas City, that's when I kind of lost interest a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
so I
Yeah.
think I agree with you guys. This one was kind of a slow burn, and aside from that great intro, it kind of fell off for me a little bit.
And I have to say one more
Moving-
thing before we go forward. I think from episode 4 to episode 6 was the stretch of where we really got to see the dad side of Joel
Mhm.
really just shine
Yes.
even more. And so,
Exactly.
and I think episode 5 is probably the highlight of it.
Yeah.
But episode 6, you get to like dive deep into it for sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to episode 5, we have the title of Endure and Survive. And of course, this is where we're introduced to Henry and Sam Burrell. Henry is played by Lamar Johnson. Sam was played by Kevon Woodard. And I think the really cool fact that a lot of people might not know unless you watch the behind the scenes is that Sam, the actor who plays Sam Kevon, is actually deaf in real life.
Oh.
So the
Yeah.
sign language that his character uses, like he actually uses that sign language in real life. He uses ASL, and they actually had like an ASL interpreter on set, someone to kind of work with everybody. So I thought, like, as far as like, you know, kind of giving you know, impaired actors kind of a chance
Right.
like this is
For
like
sure.
really cool. But
Right.
what are your thoughts on this episode that we're talking about with Henry and Sam, Chris?
Yeah, I agree. Representation is like super important. So I do love that fact that you just gave. I didn't know that the actor for Sam actually is deaf. That's pretty awesome. I know, you know, not to go off subject, but in what's the movie? Uh, Emily Blunt and her husband and their daughter's deaf.
The
It's like
Quiet
a
Place.
horror movie.
The Quiet Place.
Quiet
Yeah.
Place. So she's deaf in real life. So I think
Mhm.
things like that, it's really good to have representation. As far as the
Agreed.
heart of the episode, for me, it was the brothers. At the very end, when Henry he saved Ellie, but then he couldn't take the idea of what he just did. He had to, you know, kill his little brother, and so he popped himself. That that was really heavy. That was probably the that was probably the third heaviest thing in the series in the season one for
Wow.
me. And I thought the little baby clicker was pretty cool. That attacked Kathleen was pretty awesome.
That
No,
was
I
cool.
mean, yeah, Gary, what are your thoughts?
Oh no, I was just saying that was cool. I agree with you, Chris, wholeheartedly. Like this episode, this was the episode that outside of episode 3, where I was literally having to have some tissue and everything beside me because seeing what happened at the end with Henry turning after Ellie tried her hardest, she was like, "I can save you. Like, don't worry about it." And then she cut her hand and put it on, and then to wake up and see him just sitting there,
Mm-hmm.
and then he attack her, and then Henry having to kill his own brother,
Mm-hmm.
and then you see the grief and everything that he goes through in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
That actor, he deserves some praise for that
Oh
because
yeah.
that was phenomenal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's so much that happens in this episode that is just really great. You know, faithful to the game, kind of like in its own unique twist. Because in the game, one of the hardest bosses you fight is the bloater. When you're introduced to that, so I love how they kind of found a way to incorporate the bloater into this episode, and I also love kind of the cinematography of them kind of exploring. You know, the sewers and kind of like the underground of Kansas City as they're trying to make their way out of the city, and you see kind of where people were like in hiding, and you see kind of like the kids' classroom, and I thought that was like a really touching moment. And you see Ellie develop that relationship with Sam that I thought was just really special, kind of connecting
Right.
over comic books. You know, they were talking about comics, which I know that both of you can certainly appreciate. I know
We
you
do.
guys enjoy
Yeah.
some comics,
A little bit.
you know. So but no, absolutely, Kevon Woodard and Lamar Johnson, who play you know, Sam and Henry respectively, this episode was all about them, and rightfully so. It was just amazing to kind of see, once again, taking an entire episode and taking these characters who we just meet at the end of episode 4, and then making us care so much about them so that by the end of episode 5 you're kind of in tears again. Like, it is very rare for any show to make you care about a character that much in the span of one episode. It just doesn't happen. Usually it'll take a whole season for you to be like, okay, yeah, I guess I like him. You know,
Right.
it wasn't like that with this. You know,
No.
like the writing and the pacing, you know, even when it has that slow burn feel, was great.
Mhm.
And I agree with you, Gary. That final moment where Ellie, you could see her trying so hard to save Sam, and for it not to work, and then just in the span of like a split second with Henry kind of you know taking Sam's life officially, that moment when you kind of see the tears well up in him and he's realizing what just happened, and you don't know if he's going to shoot Ellie, you don't know if
Right.
he's going to shoot Joel, and then he takes his own life. Like
Right.
that right there
Mhm.
is like a clip that you put in the Emmys or a clip you put in the Oscars,
Right.
and he wins a freaking award for that.
Exactly.
You know, Lamar Johnson, I hope I see a lot more of him. He was absolutely phenomenal in that episode.
Same.
Great. So had us all in the feels there. Moving on to episode 6, which is called Kin. And this is where Joel and Ellie finally discover what happened to Joel's brother Tommy, and they find kind of like this sanctuary out west, which is kind of months down the road.
Mhm.
Chris, what were your thoughts with this episode?
I loved it. I loved how it led directly. The events from the end of 5 led to episode number 6. So it's a few months later, and they're in somewhere in Wyoming. It's like Jackson, Wyoming, or somewhere. But the very last thing they did in the end of 5 is they buried Henry and Sam, and then they leave on foot. So you realize it took them that long to find the next, location. And like you said, they reunite with Tommy, and he tells Tommy about the immunity that Ellie's got. Her, because have they revealed the reason why she's immune at this point, or is that later episode? I can't remember. Because I know
think that's later.
Because she's
It's later,
when
yeah.
she was born.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's revealed a little bit later.
Okay.
And actually, I think the final episode. It's
Yes,
just,
the final episode.
Okay, so it's the final. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Gary, what are your thoughts?
I think this was a really good episode, honestly. It was a perfect come up from what we got in episode 5. It was a little bit more lighthearted than
Mhm.
some of the other episodes, which have been like extremely bleak and grim,
Sad.
which is the tone of the show. But to kind of see the relationship between Joel and his brother was good, but at the same time, it was also like, I feel like it was more of a juxtaposition in regards to how Henry and Sam's relationship was,
Mhm.
because Joel was much more stern and much more tough with Tommy compared to Henry being much more soft and much more caring, almost parental like with Sam. So I really enjoyed this episode, and I think that it really was a really good juxtaposition to episode 5.
Exactly, and I love that they found that balance where like not every episode was a heavy hitter like that,
Right.
thankfully, because I don't know if you could take it,
Exactly.
Yeah, no, this episode was great. I kind of love that intro where they kind of come across like that cabin with the couple that's living there, and I love like those kind of comedic moments where like the kind of the married couple are kind of having that banter back and forth, and
That was great.
and it was just such like a nice lighthearted moment that I definitely know to start an episode we all needed that, especially
Yeah.
after what happened to Henry and Sam in the previous episode. And I truly just loved any time Tommy was on screen, played by the actor Gabriel Luna.
He was
So
great.
I first saw Gabriel Luna in Terminator Dark Fate. That was the first thing I ever saw him in. He played the Terminator in that,
Mhm.
kind of the bad guy. And I loved how menacing he was in that movie. So to see him in this role was such a departure from that. And I want to see more of that actor as well, because I just haven't seen enough of his work. But when I saw him as Tommy, like he really made me care about the character and the new life that Tommy has found for himself, and finding a partner, and his partner is pregnant, and kind of seeing, Joel realize that Tommy isn't the same Tommy that left him years ago.
Mhm.
And I love seeing that dynamic, and then also seeing Joel, kind of realize that he doesn't know if he can keep staying with Ellie, that maybe Tommy needs to take her, and you kind of realize that Ellie is finally understanding why. you
Right.
know. Moving on to the next episode, it was just called Left Behind, episode 7. This one,
I loved it.
man. So this is where we see kind of the flashback of where Ellie is bitten. So, Gary, we'll start with you this time. What did you think of this episode?
I gotta say, I love this episode. Absolutely love this episode. This is probably one of my 3 favorite episodes. Seeing Ellie and seeing where she came from, and then her progression, was such a departure from what we got in the series. So that was great. And then her connection and her relationship with, I believe her name was like Star or something.
Riley.
Riley, yes. Yeah, that connection was great. I saw what the kiss coming like a mile away, because I was like, yeah, this is too predictable, but it was really well done just because of how the progression led up to it. It wasn't just like, oh, we're gonna tease this and then it's going to be this last moment thing. No, like they actually built up to it, and they paid it off, you know. So I enjoyed that. And that actress who plays Riley, she's
Storm
one of my
Reed.
favorite. Yes,
Yeah.
she's one of my top favorite young actresses growing up. I really hope to see more of her going forward in future movies and TV series because she's phenomenal.
hmm
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I was really blown away by the acting of Storm in The Last of Us versus on Euphoria, because she plays as Rue's little sister, who's played by Zendaya
Yes.
on
Yes.
Euphoria. And I've watched all the episodes of Euphoria. I love that show, but it was just such a huge departure from the character they have her play on Euphoria, because she's so troubled, because she's trying to look up to someone that's battling so many demons themselves on that show. So for this one, she's independent. She's in her own. She's not in Zendaya or anyone else's shadow. And like you said, Gary, the kiss, that was very telegraphed. Like I knew it was coming, but the end was still like really sad. Like where they both sat there,
Mm-hmm.
and she's immune, and then she's infected, and you gotta
Right.
kill her. So yeah.
Yeah, this episode was. It really felt kind of almost reminiscent of episode 3
Mhm.
with their relationship.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love Storm Reed. So,
Mhm.
like you, Chris, I know her from Euphoria,
Yep.
and the first 2 seasons of Euphoria are hard hitting. It's it's 13 Reasons Why
Yeah.
HBO version,
Yep.
but way darker and more about the
And
drug.
a lot more screaming at each other. Like all the actors and actresses are screaming at each other on that show. Yeah.
A lot more screaming. It's really the LA version.
Yeah.
But no, and Storm was so great in that, and I mean, kind of. So Zendaya won the Emmy for Best Actress from that first season,
Mhm.
and I remember they actually showed the clip of kind of an emotional scene of Zendaya's character, and like every time she has like that emotional scene where you're like, oh, give Zendaya the Emmy.
Mhm.
Storm is sharing that scene with her, so like, that is how good Storm is. That they're able to kind of work with each other in that way, and I don't think she gets mentioned enough.
Yeah.
I am starting to see her in more things because if I'm not mistaken, she was in the newest. I'm forgetting the movie, but she was in something else that I saw her in, and she was great in that. And so I love to see her progression in this show because, like you said, it is such a departure. I loved this episode because of the builds of the suspense. Like you knew what was going to happen, right? Like we know that Ellie got bit. We know that it was in the mall because it was mentioned. And what I love about this episode is that even though this entire first season is based around the first game, this episode was actually based off of the DLC content that came out after the game. So the DLC covers this part of it. So I love how they kind of folded that into the middle of the season. And just kind of like the excitement with Ellie seeing the mall light up for the first time and then kind of exploring the mall, and it takes you back to a simpler time and a time before the end of the world, which has happened. So seeing that kind of relationship, and then you can kind of see right from the get-go how much Ellie really loves Riley. And that ending, even though we know that she's immune, at that point she doesn't know she is.
Right.
So like there's still like that moment of like we should kill ourselves. We should enjoy our last moments together. And I do really like that this was kind of a moment in the show where they didn't show Riley die.
Right.
Like you know that it happens, but I'm kind of glad they didn't show it because I'm like after they didn't really show granted Bill or Frank dying either, but I think that that's such like a nice way of like this was a great moment. We're not going to ruin it for you by showing their brains spilled out on the floor.
Yeah.
So really touching.
And one other cute moment that I felt was like full circle was when Ellie elected to stay with Joel because he had gotten stabbed. And he was trying to tell her, like, leave me. And that's when I was like, yeah, they're definitely going to be like that father-daughter combo. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And that really just started to show the maturation of Ellie. Because up to that point, she was really much childlike, almost naive to a lot of things. But at that point, she was like, okay, like, everything is serious. And I really got to make sure that he's alive because he's the only one I care about now.
Right.
Especially after everything that happened in the previous episode where she fought hard to get him to stay with her.
Right, which also made it so special that they were kind of doing that flashback with her and Riley, and you see
Exactly.
why she wants to turn around because she kind of felt like she let Riley down and she let Riley die.
Yep.
She couldn't save Riley, she couldn't save Sam, she can save Joel.
Jeez.
And so you're seeing that you're like they talk about freaking connecting the dots. Like Gary, you talk about this as a writer
Yeah.
of setup, payoff, setup, payoff. They set Ellie's character up perfectly in this. Like you see, she can't save Sam, she can't save Riley, but she knows that she can save Joel, and she's going to do everything that she can.
Exactly.
And that to me is like, oh, chef's kiss, man.
Mhm.
Chef's kiss.
Literally.
Moving on to the next episode, episode 8. These are the final 2 episodes. We're getting there. This episode is titled When We Are in Need, and this is where they meet the cannibals. Ellie comes across, these cannibals as she is trying to find food for Joel and herself. Chris, what were your thoughts?
This episode was so wild to me because my initial reaction to those guys was they're like creeps, like they're like pedos or something, you know? And
Right.
then it changes, and it's like the main guy, he's like genuinely wanting her to come back, but it then turns out it's because he's a pedo. And then he flips the script and he's like, "All right, well, if you won't come back with us, we'll just eat you because you're a cannibal now." Like, it was really good. Um, One thing I was wanting to harken back to is the full circle thing was I think like 2 episodes before. Um, uh, Ellie, she finds out what happened to Joel's daughter, and I think that sort of added more gravity to her not wanting to leave him because at the end of the day, they're all they have. And so when these guys approached her or they were following her, instead of her trying to run back to an injured Joel, she went the other way because she's trying to protect him.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that was like a huge sign of maturity on her part. So that was great.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree.
Character development at its finest.
Literally. Skylar, your thoughts?
Gary, what were your thoughts on this episode? Oh, good timing. Good timing. So, I really liked this episode. I also kind of felt like it was a bit of a suspenseful, slow burn. I loved, Scott Shepard, who played the character of David, kind of like the leader of the cannibals. I thought he brought that just enough of like that pedo creep where
He did.
yeah, like you could tell he was kind of looking at Ellie a little too
Right.
long, like Ellie's just a kid, dude. Stop
Right.
staring at her like
Right.
that. It was weird. And then you find out like, yeah, he is trying to hook up.
Mhm.
And then
So
I
weird.
love that they brought the very famous, and if you don't know this, you're going to now, the very famous voice actor Troy Baker, who voiced Joel in the game. They brought him in as James, which is David's kind of like, side guy, his right-hand man, so to speak. So this is another moment where throughout this show, they've brought in several of the voice actors, the original voice actors from the game.
Mhm.
And I love that they brought Troy Baker for this. So Gary, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Troy Baker voiced the Joker and Batman Arkham
Origins.
Okay.
Arkham Origins, and where he does a pretty good mimic of Mark Hamill. He's really good at
Yeah.
that.
He was.
And he has voiced countless games, so many games. You can look up Troy Baker. If you're a fan of video games, look up Troy Baker and look at his credentials. Like, this man has voiced every video game you could think of. So I love that we get to see him live action and on screen, and to kind of see that, he gets to kind of craft this new character. I thought this was a really emotionally independent episode for Ellie too. Like, I loved kind of like what she has to go through at the end, where it's like she has to be like, Joel isn't going to come save you. You have to do this.
Right.
And she realizes that. And so to kind of save herself, this is, I think, the first moment that she realizes that she's capable of doing that.
Yeah.
So this was a great kind of coming of age episode for Ellie, where you're right. Like, she realizes she's not going to leave Joel, but she also realizes, hey, I have to fight for my life here.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Gary, what'd you think?
This was an emotional roller coaster. From beginning to end, I was like, okay, she's good. Oh, snap. What's going on? Okay, she's good. Oh, what? And it's just like every time something crazy would happen. And then when they finally captured her and she was in the cage, I was like, okay, like, what are they about to do to Ellie? How's she going to get out of this? Is Joel going to be okay? Like, I was an emotional wreck throughout this episode. And then seeing how Ellie, like y'all said, she just grew up in this episode. And this is one of those things where people want to talk about like being a Mary Sue doesn't really fit because you got to see over the span of the last 7 episodes, Ellie fighting to get a gun, trying to fight, and you can see like she has that tenaciousness in her. But then in this episode, it's like, okay, not only is she tenacious, but she's ingenuitive and she's able to use that to her benefit. And to see her beat David was so gratifying. I'm not even gonna lie. Like to have him get, I think she stabbed him and then she burned down the cabin and everything. Like that was just phenomenal. I loved it. And then to see her and Joel just kind of walk off towards the end was almost like, okay, I can kind of relax now, but I know something stupid is about to happen in episode 9.
Exactly, for the final episode. But seeing her all scarred and beat up and then they hug each other,
Oh man,
that was very emotional. Like it was a happy moment, but at the same time, it's like, just like you said, Gary, it's like what could possibly happen next? It's like almost a tearjerker. Like they've been through enough. Like damn.
literally, let them
Well,
be
and,
in
like,
peace.
And like when he's holding her and he's like, "I got you, baby girl." When he said that, I was like,
Mhm.
I lost it, man. I was like, dude, like Pedro Pascal, can you adopt just all of us because you're father of the
Seriously.
year right now?
Mhm.
Oh, man. That's like the moment. That's the connection, right, Chris? You're talking about they're leading to this, and like that's the moment where he's like, no, like you're my kid, now. Like I'm gonna take care of you. And that leads us into the final episode of the season, episode 9, which was called "Look for the Light." And this, I think, has a really great opening because you get to see Anna, who is Ellie's mother. You get to see her journey, and this is where we find out why Ellie is immune. And fun fact about this, also talking about voice actors playing remarkable characters in the show. So Ashley Johnson, who played Anna, is the actress who played Ellie in the video games in parts 1 and part 2. So she gets to play her own mom in the show, which is really great.
That's cool.
That was great.
Gary, what did you think of this episode?
I love this episode, honestly. That opening with Ashley Johnson as Anna and seeing what she goes through and then effectively ending her own life, not necessarily on her own hand, but having to go through that whole process and then seeing how Ellie became immune. And then I think the thing that really just like had me sold was towards the end when Joel was like, we're not gonna let this happen. And he just went straight up Mando. I loved it. I loved every minute of that. This is definitely honestly, this is a top 5 episode for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Easily, yeah. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, he went like from Joel to like Joel Wick. So I loved him in this episode. It's one of those situations like, what would you do? Because letting them, dissect her or whatever they're gonna do to her could be, for the better good for the world. But at the same time, that's your kid at this point. That's your daughter at this point.
Yeah.
So I mean, everyone should be able to like empathize with him. Other than the citizens that were there, obviously they don't empathize with him because he killed all of them. But I mean, it was a great episode. It had me on both sides of the fence. But I mean, I would never want anything bad to happen to Joel or Ellie because you've been through this journey with them for like the last episode, 8 episodes before. So yeah, it was a great episode.
Yeah, no, man, that episode was such, like, talk about a roller coaster, Gary. Like, this to me was like the biggest roller coaster, and I mean, it should be, right? It's the final episode of the season, and knowing that kind of like the themes of the show and kind of the series and where this is going, and the fact that Joel never got over the grief of losing his daughter Sarah, and knowing that Ellie has kind of become that surrogate daughter. This is like where it really meets ahead, because like literally, like you said, Chris, like, what would you do? You're literally given the chance. You could potentially save the world if they're able to create a vaccine out of her blood and out of dissecting her, but that means the end of her life. Would you be willing to save the world, or would you be willing to save your daughter?
Right.
And I feel like most shows or maybe movies 20 years ago, it would have been like, yeah, I'm gonna go here and cry for a little bit, but you go ahead and create that vaccine. I know that's what
Right.
she would have wanted, right? Like kind of like the noble thing to do, right? That maybe the religious side of you, what would
Yeah.
you really do to save the world? But I love that this show is grounded in reality, and it's
Mhm.
grounded in the real emotions of human beings, and that the fact that we're not perfect.
Right.
Mhm.
And just as Ellie realized that she couldn't save these other people, but she can save Joel, Joel realized I couldn't save my daughter, but I can save her.
Hmm.
And that's his
Yeah.
moment. And like you said, Chris, you stole the words right from my mind. He went full John Wick. He went in there. He made these soldiers look like scrubs.
Mhm.
Like he just
Right.
went in there. I mean, like, and I love that whole montage of him going up the stairs and taking them all out. And I love how they kind of took the sound out of the scene. Like we talk about, the use of sound a lot, and how, production quality works, and then to kind of use that and kind of the echoes, and it's almost like that Joel in this moment is zoned out. He's just in killer mode. He's not
Right.
thinking. He's just like, I just need to kill and I need to get to her. And I love that the scene and the way they shot it made you feel like that too.
Mhm.
Like you felt like nothing else mattered. He had to go through a brick wall to get there,
Right.
and he did it. And
Yeah.
he was taking out all these guys left and right. Literally made them look like they had no training at all.
My adrenaline
Made
was
him-
popping when he did that.
No, he was just. I mean, he went like John Wick, Batman, whatever you want to compare him to. He was.
Right.
He went dad mode, and to see him save her, and then just those final moments where he lies to her.
Yeah,
Right.
I loved it though
Nice.
because you can sort of tell that he knew that his lies weren't adding up. It's just that he wouldn't openly admit it, and she runs with it. I love that part. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you see like that final scene on her face where she's like, "I know you're lying to me," because it's like that dad, right? Like all parents lie to their kids. All
Mhm.
parents lie to their kids. But are you going to lie to your kid if it meant their death or them being alive? Because she doesn't know that they were going to like completely kill
Right.
her. I
Right.
don't think she realized that. They were like, "Yeah, go to sleep. Oh yeah, by the way, we're going to take her brain
Right.
apart."
Exactly.
She didn't know that. So I don't think she doesn't understand the stakes of it, but she does know that she was there to help. And at that point in time, we know that she was willing to sacrifice anything to help people. But Joel wasn't ready to lose her, and Joel isn't going to lose
Right.
her.
Mhm.
And I love that the lengths that he went to save her and to protect her, because I think at the end of the day, you can say the moral thing is to save humanity, but I think all of us here, if you really love someone, if you have a family member that you care about more than anything, you're going to do the same thing, or you're going to want to
Right.
do the same thing.
Right.
And it shows the lengths that a father will go. And I loved that because he couldn't do it for Sarah because Sarah died so quickly.
Exactly.
And then just like that final moment, like that every parent lies, but you're lying to protect her.
Mhm.
I thought that just like that really cemented the show for me as a top show of the
Yep.
year. I know Gary, you and I have talked about it being one of our most anticipated shows, but it's definitely a top show of the year easily, regardless of what comes out the rest of the year from me.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, kind of final thoughts on the overall season before we talk about what we grade this season as.
Chris, we'll let you get started.
Final thoughts. I mean, it to me it couldn't have been better. If they had tried to go even more over the top or even more this or that, it probably would have actually lessened the quality of it. I feel like it was a pretty perfect adaptation. You could enjoy it and have never played the video game. Like I've briefly played the video game, and I still love the show as if it was like the next big thing on TV, and it's just a TV show, you know. Oh, and one other thing about him lying to her at the end, I love the nature of how he lied to her, because he made sure that the lie he told wasn't something where she would feel guilty. So he was protecting her mind and her heart at the same time. He was like, "Oh, it didn't work. It wasn't gonna work." Like I love the fact that he did that. So yeah.
Yeah. I love that too. What are your final thoughts, Skylar?
Final thoughts. It had been a while since I played the game, and I kind of was going back through playing it. I didn't get to finish it the second round, the second time, but I was playing through it about halfway through it, and I loved the moments that they took in this show that were faithful to the game, and the moments where they took their liberties. Like a lot of the times, you see a movie that's a video game adaptation, and I'm going to use Prince of Persia as an example again, because I was a big fan of those games for the PlayStation 2, and how much of a departure it was. And you could take your liberties and it could be terrible or it could be great. And I loved what didn't bother me about this show at all is that when they did take their liberties and they altered the story or the characters or they added people, it didn't bother me. Like, I mentioned kind of like the leader in Kansas City. Was it, something that really pulled me into the episode? No, but I didn't hate it either. Like it didn't make me hate the episode or want to turn off the show. And I think that's what made this show so successful to me, is that what they adapted that was faithful to the game was spot on, like frame by frame, emotion, stakes, setup and payoff. And then what they were able to alter fit in, and it helped it flow so easily. So I loved it. Yeah, and I'll give my rating as soon as we get to it. But Gary, what were your final thoughts?
Oh my god.
Honestly, to me, this is probably, if it's not the best show that's come out so far this year, it should be considered the best show that's come out so far. We love action, we love, good fight scenes and things like that. But this show, what it lacked in a good action scene, it made up tenfold in emotion and character and development and plot and writing, all that. And you can't take anything away from a show that has good plot, good storytelling, great character development, even if there is little action. And the little action that we got was really good. So to me, it's like, if this show is not, and this is the hill I'm going to die on, if this show is not an Emmy contender next year, I'm boycotting Emmys. I will never watch the Emmys ever again, because this show has so many things that it could easily win an Emmy for, and deservingly. So yeah, that I'll definitely save my rating for afterwards. Oh no, looks like we lost Chris.
We lost Chris. Oh no. So Chris, as we're talking about ratings, if you were to rate this show 1 out of 10, or not 1 out of 10, but out of 10, right? With 10 being the best, what would you give the first season of The Last of Us?
Whew, that's tough. I would probably give it because I don't give any show a 10, because I don't think any franchise or show or movie or anything's perfect, but it'd definitely be like a 9. It'd be a 9, because it's the first television-based video game adaptation that I enjoy. I would watch the show before I would watch someone do a playthrough or walk through the video game, because I feel like there's so much more emotion. There's heart. You got actual human beings. You have Pedro Pascal. I mean, you can't emulate that or put that on a video game, like not him at least. So yeah, I'd give it a 9 out of 10.
Very fair, very fair. Gary, how about you?
I'm usually with Chris. I don't give anything a 10. Only time I give something a 10 is if it absolutely just blows me away and deserves it. The Last of Us deserves it.
Okay.
It's a 10.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no issues with this
show. That is saying something. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm kind of with both of you, where I very rarely give 10s. I'm usually pretty harsh with my reviews. Gary knows this. But with this, there is no harsh review coming at all. I'm not going to give it a 10, but I am going to give it a 9.8.
Okay.
It's as close.
Right at
honestly, for me, it's as close for a TV show to be as perfect as, in my opinion, as I've seen it in recent years, in at least five or 6 years. So there's been a lot of good TV, and I feel like with streaming especially, we get really great shows every year, but it's definitely up there with the best of them. I love where they took this. So 9.8 out of 10. I'm excited for season 2 for sure.
Same.
All right, so we finished our spoiler section review of The Last of Us, and Chris, we're really happy to have you on. We do have one more part that we want to talk about, something that you know all too well because you've been doing the voting. We're going to be talking about the winners of the current bracket of the movie tournament for pre-round 3. This is the North region, if I'm not mistaken. And so, Gary, why don't you tell them who the winners are with the matchups?
So this was a lot of good matchups, honestly. I enjoyed this bracket. Just to kind of go over the matchups again, and then I'll go over the winners. First matchup, we had the Old Guard facing off against Blade Runner 2049. We had Ex Machina facing off against The Martian. Godzilla, King of the Monsters versus Avatar. And then Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs facing Megamind. So the winners are Blade Runner 2049, 8-6 over the Old Guard. Very close. Then we got The Martian over Ex Machina, 10-5.
Hmm.
Godzilla King of the Monsters over Avatar, 8-7.
Upset.
Yep,
Right?
definitely an upset.
And then we have Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs winning over Megamind, 10-6. So, Skylar, Chris, thoughts?
I'm a huge kaiju fan, so I was definitely one of those votes for Godzilla. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I know the cultural impact of Avatar and the amount of money it's raked in, but in terms of me just sitting in a theater or at home and turning my brain off and enjoying a flick, like, it's hard for me to beat like a Godzilla movie, you know, because
Yeah.
they're always gonna have that same type of linear narration, like what's gonna happen during the film. You're gonna have a threat, and then you have the whole part where you don't know if Godzilla's friend or foe, and then he's gonna defeat the threat, and then he goes off into the ocean, or she goes off into the ocean, and never to be seen again, quote unquote. And then you see him again in like 5 years in another movie. So I love that about Godzilla, though. It's consistent.
Yeah.
You know, it's a consistent guilty pleasure of mine to watch kaiju films. So that was the one that stood out for me.
When the world needed her most, she yeah, no. What I love about this bracket is I believe this is the first bracket out of the previous three that we've done that is the closest.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. A lot of these mashups are really close, and to me, it made me a little nervous with how close the Old Guard and Blade Runner 2049 is, because you know how I feel about Blade Runner 2049. I love me some futuristic noir. I love the original Blade Runner, but I loved where this one went, and it is aesthetically one of my favorite visual films ever, like of all time. It's easily top 5 as far as cinematography, as far as pacing, as far as kind of the world that's established. It's a bit of a slow burn though, so I know it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, and I know that as far as box office wise, it was technically a flop, which I know Denis Villeneuve, the director, was very upset about. But I loved Blade Runner 2049. I will die on that hill. It should honestly go all the way to the final if it were up to me. And I'm very surprised that 6 people voted for the Old Guard over that.
True.
But you know,
I
it's
agree.
fine. Once again, this
I
is
was one of those
subjective.
6.
Ooh. Uh-oh. That's for another podcast.
No. All right. Well, we're officially splitting. No.
It's going to be called Nerd Inc.
There's only one nerd now. I'm taking your nerd badge. No, I'm kidding. No, that's fine. I understand. You know, we can't agree on everything, Gary, and the people listening know that we agree on most things, so
Yes.
it's okay.
I can tell Skylar's thinking in his head. He's like, we can't always be right.
Chris, you know me, my friend. You know me. Yeah, I was surprised with the upset of Godzilla over Avatar. To be completely honest, Gary, you know how I feel about James Cameron recently, but I did finally see Avatar 2 and how it connects to the first Avatar. And I will say that as far as world building goes, even if it is, a lot of people call it a ripoff of like Fern Gully or Pocahontas, right? The story, which it really
It
is.
is.
It's just it's another white director adapting a story and making the people blue, and that's
Right.
what happened. But I, for what it was at the time, I would say that Avatar was more groundbreaking, so I did vote for that. Was definitely surprised by that. I also voted for Megamind over Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Me
So
too.
I was kind of surprised to see how that turned out, but I get it, because Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs was a great book that we all grew up with. So I understand, when you're a kid, you relate to that book and you're like, man, I just wish I had some food raining down, especially like, if you didn't have the food that you wanted at home and you came home and you're like, Mom, can it rain spaghetti and meatballs today? So I get it. So yeah, I thought that bracket, this was a really fun one. We had a lot of close calls. As far as the next pre-round, the final pre-round bracket, we are moving to the West region. Gary, you want to let everyone know who they're going to be voting for on Wednesday, the day after this episode drops.
So this is what I call the horror region, horror/superhero region.
Okay.
We got Cloverfield facing Insidious, Devil facing off against Poltergeist, Hereditary versus Smile,
Ooh.
and then to me, the slaughter that's going to come. The Dark Knight facing off against Iron Man 2.
Wow. Oh, well, okay.
Look,
There's always
I'm
one.
I'm putting it out there now. If the Dark Knight doesn't dog walk Iron Man 2, I swear to God.
I agree. It better.
Yeah,
It better. I will give up on humanity.
I will end the bracket. No
Right.
more movie tournament.
Right. We're just going to cancel the bracket.
Everyone's gonna vote for Iron Man 2 now, just to spite us. Of course, we're not trying to sway your opinion. This is a subjective vote. It is your opinion on which film you think is better. And once again, like, this ultimately doesn't mean anything. This is for fun. This is our annual tournament. So you vote, of course, how you see fit.
Mm-hmm.
The brackets are really starting to round up, though, because after this next pre-round, we do have the quarterfinals coming up. So the tournament goes on. It's been really exciting so far. Thank you to all of you that have participated so far and voted. Chris, thank you for participating and voting, because we know you've been really active with it and kind of sharing your thoughts. So
For sure.
we do love that. And, word of mouth, once again, is really strong. So keep telling your friends about the tournament, and keep telling your friends about the podcast. Gary, any final thoughts for today's episode?
No, not really. Chris, it's been great having you on. You're gonna definitely have to come on a future episode.
For sure.
Maybe not a review episode, so that we can have some other deep conversations about nerd stuff with your wealth of knowledge.
Most definitely. I have that. I have a lot of nerdy knowledge. But I appreciate you guys having me on. It's been really great. I appreciate you guys plugging the nerd group at the beginning of it. The group, I'll just say like a real quick spill, and you guys are both in the group. You're great members in the group. It's really big on inclusion. We don't want anyone to feel left out or outcast. It's supposed to be like that cozy corner of the internet where you can give your opinions or your love for nerdom and not get gatekeeped or like get yelled at or whatever the case may be. You don't have to fight any battles in our group. So I think that's one of the really cool highlights of the circle of nerds. But I really appreciate you guys both having me on.
Not a problem, man. Once again, we know you're a wealth of knowledge. In the years that I've known you, I've always appreciated our conversations about a huge range of topics. And yeah, definitely check out the Circle of Nerds, the group on Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, hop on just to join this group, because they do have really great discussions, great posts. And of course, the Nerds Inc. podcast is also involved with the group. So we share our episodes and updates on there as well, which Chris has been very gracious in letting us do that. So check them out. Chris, so happy to have you on, man. We'll definitely do it again.
For sure.
And once again, everybody, I'm Skylar.
I'm Gary.
And this has been the Nerds Inc. podcast. Check us out next week. Make sure to vote. Thank you, guys.